Here we have a serger. This is a 3/4 thread serger, and it is one of the most common stitches that you're going to use on any serger. You can sew both stretch and non-stretch garments. And if you get a look here, you'll be able to see there's a perfect 3/4 thread seam. You have the over edge on the top and the over edge on the bottom that lock on the edge, so it keeps any material from fraying off. You have two seams. You have a seam here and you have a seam right there. And so that basically gives you a safety seam. So if the outer one breaks for whatever reason, you still have another seam there. But this is what the bottom looks like. This is what the top looks like. And this is going to be like I say, the most common serge seam that you're going to wind up using. You have a couple of different things on this machine. You have your stitch length, which the average stitch length is 2.5 millimeters. And you have a differential feed, which changes the relationship between the rear feed dog set, which I'll show you that here right quick. You have a rear feed dog set and you have a front feed dog set. Whenever you change the differential feed, you make this one and this one feed at a different rate. And best way to actually figure out how to do that, just get a piece of lighter weight fabric and put it underneath there and turn your differential feed to its highest setting and to its lowest setting, and do a seam with each one, and then you can kind of see what it does. You can advance the differential feed so that this feed dog will feed more aggressively than the rear feed dog. If you lengthen the stitch out, or shorten the stitch length, this feed dog is going to feed shorter. This feed dog, you can, with the differential feed adjustment, you can make it feed real aggressively, which will push lots of fabric into the seam. This works great for if you're hemming the bottom of a sweater and you don't want the wave, you push a little more fabric in there, then you wind up with a nice flat seam on a stretchy material. If you want to do lettucing, like on the sleeve of a frilly sleeve of a dress, you can make this one feed slower, and you can make this one feed at a little faster rate. And so when you put it on a rolled hem, it will actually pre-stretch the fabric, and by pre-stretching the fabric, you wind up having lots of thread poked into the fabric or added to the fabric, which keeps the material stretched out, and you wind up with the frilly designs on your sleeves. So that's the basic differential feed. You have your upper looper and you have your lower looper. The lower looper just goes back and forth below the needle plate, and the upper looper you'll see comes above the needle plate. So if we advance this, you see the lower looper is just going back and forth underneath, and the upper looper comes up above the needle plate to engage the needles. So all this is a modified chain stitch, and that's why you don't have to have a bobbin, because it uses 4 cones of thread, 2 for the loopers, 2 for the needles. You can unthread this inner needle and have just a wide 3-thread seam, or you can unthread this outer needle and remove the needle, and then you can have a very narrow 3-thread seam, so like a rolled hem or a seam like on active wear. Your upper thread tensions will usually have a marking denoting their normal tension for a standard 3/4 thread seam. And so this says 4, 4, 4, 4. They have tensions here that you can change the setting, because if you're using a different kind of thread, for example, if you were using a woolly nylon on the 2 looper threads, these 2 here, this looper thread, you can get a softer seam against your skin. So in active wear, a lot of times they like to use the woolly nylon because it's softer against your skin and it has some stretch to it, so it's less likely to break a seam. But you'll need to, in most cases, turn this down these 1 or 2 numbers, because the woolly nylon flattens out in the tension discs and it actually creates more tension. So most of the time you have to thread that down. And if you're going to thread woolly nylon through your loopers, you're never going to thread woolly nylon by itself. You tie a piece of this thread onto the woolly nylon and then pull it through your loopers on both upper and lower looper. Makes it a whole lot easier. So if you're new to sergers, all of these sergers are going to have some sort of declination that's going to show you where the common setting is for the common seam. So this is a 3/4 thread seam. This machine is going to show you how to thread it for a 3/4 thread seam. And this gives you some more information, but almost all sergers will have this information inside their looper cover door. It's a good idea to always thread this with several different colors of thread, so that way it's easy to distinguish which thread you're adjusting if you do decide to change your tension. You may want to change your looper thread tensions to a lower setting if you're using woolly nylon, usually 1 to 2 numbers, because the woolly nylon will actually flatten out and it creates more tension in your tension discs. So you usually have to turn your upper thread tension down a couple of numbers. Our red is our upper looper, you can see, and our lower looper thread is going to be the white over here. And then we have 2 seams. We have the purple right there, and then we have the white, which is this needle thread. So left needle thread, right needle thread, upper looper, lower looper. You have to make sure that you thread this correctly, and there again, that is why you have the diagram, so you make sure that it's threaded correctly. A lot of times, if someone's having problems with a serger, I usually will tell them to remove all the threads from the serger, go do something for at least a half an hour, and then come back and retry and rethread your serger. Because if you do miss something on a serger, because there's so many little places the thread has to get into, you'll miss it 100 times, and all it'll do is frustrate you. So that's a good tip. Just make sure you unthread your serger and go away for a while. So this is a perfect 3/4 thread seam. It meets on the edge like it's supposed to. You have your 2 seams, and they are nice and tight on the back. So everything's good there. But the tensions are going to give you some problems, but you have to kind of play around with them a little bit in order to find out what they're going to do. We're going to take a small piece of fabric here, and we're just going to change our upper looper tension. We're going to drop it down 2 numbers. If we look at our seam, remember this is our upper looper thread, the red. Okay, by loosening this off, it allows the lower looper thread to have more pull. And so you see, by loosening the upper thread off, it comes all the way around to the bottom. And usually that's not what you're after, because this is pretty loose, sloppy seam here, so it's not correct. If we turn this back up to our normal thread tension setting, and we're going to turn the lower looper down 2 numbers, and we should see the adverse effect. It's not too awfully bad. It didn't have as much of an effect. This looper thread here seems a little bit too loose for me. See, that's a little bit too loose for me. You're going to wind up doing a lot of this guessing, because the material has an effect and the thread has an effect on your seam. So remember, we threaded this with a different color, so we know that's the needle thread and that's the right. So we're going to increase this 1 number. We're going to turn this back up to here for the moment so we can see how this is going to affect our seam, our right needle thread seam. Our right needle thread seam still seems to be just a little bit loose, and our lower thread is actually still winning. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase our upper thread tension a full number, and if you look right there, the lower looper thread seems to be pulling that in nice and snug. So we probably don't need to change it anymore, because if you change the needle threads, you get them too tight, what it's going to do is start puckering your fabric, and you don't want that. That looks pretty good. We're going to go up one more number. What we're doing is we're increasing the thread tension on this red thread to pull it up around the corner to the top. Now then you can see our thread is meeting right on the edge. It's a perfect seam. That's what you're after. So this kind of fabric is going to be different than this kind of fabric. This kind of fabric was sewn with everything on its normal setting, but this fabric, because it's a starched cotton, requires a little more tension on two of the different tension nozzles. So this is perfect. This is a lightweight cotton fabric. This is a starched cotton. Just that much difference in the fabric, even though they're about the same thickness, it's a different fabric, so it requires a different tension setting. So by having different colors in there, you can actually see what you're adjusting. So you just have to follow the colors. That's it. Once you get your regular colors on, what I suggest is taking these threads and kind of unweaving a little bit and staple this to a piece of paper and pull those out, and then label them. Left needle, right needle, upper looper, it's the one that comes up above the needle plate, and lower looper, which goes just back and forth across the bottom. If we try our seam one more time here. Okay, so we have a great seam there. That's what we're after. You always want to make sure that your tensions are set correctly for the thread. And so your default tension should be good for almost any fabric. There will be some variations, and that is why they make it adjustable, so you can change it. But you don't have to be afraid of your tensions. Tensions are there to actually help you. They're an aid for you. So if you feel the need to adjust your tensions because your seam doesn't look as well, what you don't want to do is turn it just that tiny little amount, because if you just turn it that tiny little amount, you're not going to notice enough difference on your seams to tell if you're going the right direction or not. So make sure you turn your tensions at least one full number, up or down. It doesn't matter which. You will then be able to look at the seam, and you'll be able to tell an appreciable difference. And once you can see that, then you'll wind up with being able to adjust it correctly. So if you went the wrong way, one full number, you go back and then you go another full number the opposite direction and see what the result is like. This would be your needle thread tension there again, and this is your upper looper, lower looper. Make sure that you always have your serger threaded correctly. That's the most important thing, and that is the most common problem, is threading. So it's very important to make sure that you thread it. And all of these will have colors to show you where they go, and they usually have corresponding colors where the thread is supposed to go. Green, 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 and then it's going to be in the looper, which is showing here as green. So it gives you an idea without having to get a manual out. You have the threading instructions right here. And remember, the tip is, if you're having problems with your serger, you're not getting a nice seam, to unthread the serger. And I know everybody freaks out when I say that. That's usually when I hear the phone drop to the floor when I say, just unthread your serger. Unthread your serger, pull the threads all completely out, go do something for at least a half an hour, something that takes your mind off of your serger, and then come back and sit down. And it's amazing how much difference that makes solving problems on sergers, the most common problem, which is threading. The other tip is The best needle size to use on sergers is a size 90-14. 90-14 gives you the strongest needle that you can use without running the risk of breaking your loopers. Size 16-100 is a lot of times stronger than the loopers on these machines, and you can bend or break your loopers. If you go to a size smaller needle than a 90-14, because these needles are entering at an angle, they can deflect fairly easily, which can put burrs on your pressure foot, put burrs on your needle plate. They can deflect and your hook can pick them up. You can bend the loopers or throw them out of adjustment, change your timing on the machine accidentally, all different kinds of things. So 90-14 is always the best size to use. You just have to make sure that you have the correct type of needle. There are different points that you have for different needle threads and different materials. So you've got a stretch needle for stretch fabrics, and basically that's a needle that has a rounded point to it, so it will part the fibers of the knitted fabric and go in between them rather than penetrating the fibers. If it penetrates the fibers, it creates a excessive stress on the thread, and the needle can make the fabric stretch as it penetrates that fiber, and you can get what they call flagging, which leads to skip stitches and frayed threads and needle deflection and all kinds of other things. Stretch fabrics require a stretch needle. 90-14 is the best needle to use there again. And if you're using a densely woven fabric, you can use a microtex needle, which has extra sharp points for penetrating heavier fabrics. You can also get, if you're doing a lightweight denim, you can use a 90-14 denim needle, which gives you a slightly larger eye and thread groove, and it will also give you a longer, sharper point. So the point of the needle will penetrate the denim fabrics easier. So the other tip that I'm going to share with you is about going over seams. Sergers are meant for miles and miles and yards of flat sewing. As soon as you add a seam in there, like on a pant seam, anything like that, the sergers are not really designed specifically for that. Once you add that seam in there, that's when you can get the needle deflection. So it's always a good idea to make sure when you're coming to a seam, you can sew the seam partway underneath there, but you want to turn the machine by hand, because your hand can feel if something's going wrong or the needle is deflecting. Your hand will be able to tell that, but your foot can't. So if you have your foot on the foot control and you're powering over seams, you are destined to have problems with needle breakage, timing, looper breakage, scarring up your needle plate and your presser foot. So make sure, going over seams, especially heavy ones, turn your serger by hand, and you'll be able to get over those seams without having a problem. The next thing we want to talk about is the serger blades. So you have two, an upper blade and a lower blade. These are just like a pair of scissors. They have a blade on the bottom and a blade on the top, a cutting edge, and those are going to mesh and trim your fabric as you sew. It's driven off of the inside of the sewing machine. It's extremely important that you don't sew over any pins, because you're going to mar the blade, one or both of the blades. Just like a pair of scissors, you don't want to cut pins with your serger or with your scissors, because you're going to wind up damaging your scissors, and then it's going to leave a little wispy where it wouldn't cut the thread at that pin marking on your blades of either your scissors or your serger blades. So take real good care to make sure before you get to the presser foot, pull your pins out so you don't sew over them accidentally. If you make it a habit of doing it while it's out, before it gets to the presser foot, it just ensures that you're not going to catch it on the blade. Final tip is maintenance for your serger. It's important to have your serger serviced every 3 to 5 years. That's what we recommend based on the way that we service them. You want to make sure that if you set down to your serger, if it hasn't been used for a long time, and you can't turn the hand wheel, No matter how hard you turn, don't use your motor, because if you try to use your motor, you'll just burn the motor up. So what you want to do then is bring that machine in if it's like that. And the reason that that can happen from sitting for long periods of time is the original lubricants that are put on these machines internally have fillers in them. And the fillers make the oil or the lubricants more affordable. But the problem is once the oil dissipates, then it leaves those fillers behind, which can gum up your machine and cause it to run slowly or labor when you're trying to sew with it if you have the motor engaged. So make sure you have your machine serviced every 3 to 4 years. If you can't turn the hand wheel, bring it in and have it serviced. And it's always best about once a month, once every 2 months. If you simply take a piece of fabric, something similar to this, and do 3 or 4 seams on your serger, then this machine will last and you won't have the problem with it gumming up, because it will keep the lubricants liquid inside the machine. And it'll keep those lubricants moving inside the machine. I hope this helps. And if you have any questions, don't forget to leave me comments down below. Like and subscribe. You'll be notified when we get new videos, and it does help the channel. But we'll wind up adding videos on a regular basis, and I hope you got something out of this video. Let me know if you did. Thanks for watching.